Good afternoon, everybody. Glad y'all can make it. It's good to see some young people here because I'm actually on my spring break right now and I teach people y'all's age. I teach juniors and seniors at high school. So it's good to talk about my book instead of the stuff I teach every day, which currently is Great Gatsby, which I love, but not everybody loves, and Macbeth and things like that. So it's nice to be able to talk to something a little bit different with, because I never get to talk about my own work really with my students. So it's good to see some young faces out here. Just a little background about how I got here as an author. I didn't start writing, I'm 42 years old now. I didn't start writing until I was in my 30s. Reading was something that I was into when I was really young, and then when I was in high school, I completely lost interest. You couldn't make me read anything because the stuff they were giving me to read, it didn't really resonate with me. And so I'm glad, like in my 20s, I started finding things like crime fiction, stuff about like forensic psychology, because I was watching those criminal shows on television. I was like, I want to read more about this kind of stuff. And that's kind of where I like rediscovered my love for reading. I was reading about serial killers and stuff that, you know, as a 13 or 14-year-old, my parents probably would have had me checked out if they'd known I was reading that stuff. But it did help me to like rediscover my love for reading. I was a news and documentary film major in college the first time. I thought about going into broadcasting, and then later I went back and got my English degree, and I teach high school English now. And then I get a master's in creative writing in my early 30s because I wanted to write, and I was like, well, how do I write? I was like, I knew how to read. I read a lot of stuff. I watched a lot of stuff. I was like, I want to know how to do this. And so I didn't actually start writing until I was in my 30s. And then a few years later, I was lucky enough to have my book published. So I'll tell you a little bit about what I write. I'll read a little excerpt from it, just kind of so you kind of know what it's about. And then, you know, questions, if anybody in here. I usually like to feed off the audience. I want it to be a good experience for y'all and not just me up here rambling. So let me get out my travel copy of this book. It doesn't have a cover on it because I messed up the sleeve on it. But so my first book is actually based in modern times in a setting very much like Rockingham County. I grew up in Randolph County, so it's I fictionalized a town. I never wanted to use the town I grew up in because you start getting phone calls and emails about like messing up details, or you might mention a last name and inadvertently it's somebody's family's last name and you've offended that person. So I set a fictional town, but very similar to where I grew up, sort of in a rural part of North Carolina. And again, I was reading, when I was starting to write this, I was watching and reading a lot of stuff that was based on a missing persons, or it was based on, you know, a murder that happened or a crime. And so that's kind of where my interest always was. I was like, I don't want to write a story unless something bad happens and someone's got to figure out. So I sort of write in a mystery / whodunit type of a genre, and that's kind of what I stick with. And the stuff I'm working on now is sort of in that genre as well. So my first book, It Dies With You, follows a young 30-year-old ex-boxer. So my background is also in martial arts. I'm a jiu-jitsu black belt, and I used to train in boxing and Muay Thai and things like that. And so while I was going through school, I was like doing all that mental exercise during the day, and at nights I was training and all that. So it gave me a background that was unique. And what I tell a lot of young writers, whether you write or not, or ever want to, I always tell people to find what's unique about you and lean into that so you can find your own voice and try to, instead of trying to be someone else, whether you're writing songs, poetry, fiction, nonfiction, you know, you have your own unique voice. And I tried to find what mine was. So those experiences I had with like martial arts kind of play into this book because the narrator is he's 30 years old, he's an ex-boxer. He has a strained relationship with his father. They don't really speak. The idea came from a buddy of mine that had a very similar relationship with his father. We were talking one day, and he said, if my dad passed away today, I don't think I would cry at the funeral. And that struck me. I was like, wow, that's a pretty heavy statement because I had a good relationship with my own father. So I started to think, like, what if this person, you know, their father did pass away, and they haven't really spoken to him in a few years, but they find out a couple weeks after the funeral that father's left a substantial inheritance to them, like that they did not expect. Because why would they, why would the parent leave something behind to a child they never spoke to? So that was the premise that I first came up with for this book, and I just kind of leaned into that. I used this ex-boxer who's down on his luck. He's been suspended from the sport. His father dies, again, similar relationship to my friend had with his father. And right after the funeral, he gets a call from a lawyer and says, your father ran this junkyard back in your hometown. It's worth over $250,000. It's yours now. How would you react to that? It's kind of an odd situation to be in. But also, if you don't have any money, and someone offers you that, you can't just turn it down. It's yours now. So I'll read just a little short excerpt from this. So this is soon after the narrator finds out that he's inherited this substantial piece of property. He has to go down and sign some paperwork in his hometown. And the person he's about to talk to is his stepmother. Also, he doesn't have a good relationship with her. His own mother, he gets along with great. They still speak. But the stepmother, much like his deceased father, that's a relationship that he no longer has. So if you feel a little tension between the two, him and this woman named Tammy, his stepmother, that's why. Okay, so here we go. Other than dogs barking and sniffing my leg, there was no greeting when I walked inside the house. Tammy just tapped her nails on a file folder and said, "Your father wrote this up after his first heart attack last year, so you already know what's in it, and ain't nothing changed." Whatever was in it sure had her ruffled, and that was a gift within itself. I took a seat next to Tammy on the couch, but not too close. "Let's get to it," I said. "I have work this afternoon." Tammy lifted her chin and leered through two tiny slits. "Your daddy always said that was just about the stupidest job anybody could do, babysit a bunch of drunks for a living." Side note, he's bouncing at a bar right now, so that's what he's talking about. "Ask me if I give a damn," I said, feeling disgust for both her and Dad. I'd lost count of how many times Dad had badmouthed my boxing career or anything else I did that wasn't a 9-to-5er. In his eyes, anything outside of a traditional work day wasn't real work. I held out my hand. "I didn't drive all the way down here to talk about my job." Tammy huffed and pulled a paper out of the folder she was holding. She gave it an icy glance and then held a burgundy speckled fingernail next to a section titled Money and Personal Property. I took the paper and read the lines below the heading. "I give all the money from my personal savings, my vehicles, and my tangible personal property at 1701 Creekview Drive, including all policies and proceeds of insurance covering such property, to my wife, Tammy Jenkins Miller. I give my 3 rental properties at 110, 111, and 112 Went Road, as well as my personal business, my salvage yard, Miller's Pull Apart, the land on which it sits, along with all accounts and professional equipment belonging to the business, to my son, Hudson Lee Miller." So this is when he finds out he's just inherited all that. I read the last line again and one more time very carefully to be sure. The truth of my words were confirmed when I looked up and saw the animosity in Tammy's glare. "You've known about this for over a year?" She searched her purse, only producing an empty pack of cigarettes. "Thought some of that might change," she said, pushing her purse away. "Never thought he had so little time left when he wrote it." There was no doubt she wanted the rental properties and the salvage yard for herself. She wanted everything. "Guess you can sell all that off." Her words oozed with bitterness. "Don't know who'd want that salvage yard. And those rental homes, they're more a headache than they're worth. Leland should have got rid of them things years ago." I hadn't even known my dad still owned the rental properties, 3 modular homes no bigger than double wides he'd bought when I was young. They sat side by side on a piece of property Dad called the Ponderosa, though I never knew why. He probably thought it sounded fancy, but it was far from it. It was more like a mobile home park, except the homes weren't mobile. "Somebody might want the salvage yard," I mumbled. "Keep in mind the Winnebago parked out there belongs to me." Tammy held up her copy of the will, pointed at the word vehicles. I ignored her greed. My mind was reeling, trying to solve the biggest mystery of all, why Dad had left me those things. Beyond the fact that we weren't close and had never once discussed any of this, I didn't know anything about being a landlord and even less about running a salvage yard. Maybe I considered it was the macho side of my dad, making sure a man took over the business. And not just any man, but someone from the Miller bloodline. Or possibly, my dad knew Tammy was too damn stupid to know what to do with all of it. My personal bias aside, Tammy was as helpless a person as I'd ever met. After all the grief my dad gave me for boxing and bartending, it was a real mind blower that he gave her a pass. Her idea of a job for years was sitting in the living room smoking and drinking Diet Mountain Dew while she stuffed envelopes full of entry forms to every sweepstakes, prize drawing, and contest imaginable. Occasionally, she'd even win, which I credited to sheer statistics, a numbers game like a terrible boxer landing a lucky punch once in a blue moon. Sometimes Tammy would win a check, sometimes a gift card. One time, this mini fridge she sold in a garage sale within a week of winning it. Still, I was pretty sure she never broke even considering all the money she blew on postage. Now, here she was, greedy as Don King. She just won a house, a truck, an RV, and whatever cash Dad had tucked away over the years. That is, if she could ever find it all. She probably needed a treasure map just to scratch the surface. That part tickled me, imagining Tammy crawling through Dad's backyard with a garden shovel, her knees and elbows mud-caked. I got up from the couch. I guess I'll have to sign some papers soon. I wasn't purposely salting her wounds with a comment, but I didn't regret its obvious effect when she cut me a dirty look. You know, it must be nice to get something you didn't even earn, she said. Last I checked, my last name's Miller. You ain't been a Miller for years. What the hell's that supposed to mean? How much did you come around to see your daddy once you left town? Once a year? Twice? You got to be kidding me, I said, withholding words like psycho and nut job that swirled in my mind. You think that's all my fault? You barely even called after the heart attacks. Of all people, I don't owe you an explanation, Tammy. I turned to walk away, but her words followed me to the door along with her sniffling dogs. I used to clean those rental units. I won't be doing that anymore, she said. I looked back with a squinty-eyed smile. I think I can manage, I said. And speaking of earning something, you know who really deserves everything that Dad left you? She cocked her head. My mom, I told her. All right. So that's when he finds out. So you could feel that strained relationship between the two. And so after that, he does have to move back to his hometown, a place where he never really felt that welcome. And he's got to kind of navigate, you know, living away from there from so long and then like brushing up against people from his past. And also, you know, some of those people liked his father, which he didn't. And some of those had the same opinion of his father that he did. And so when he does return home to run the salvage yard, they end up making a couple of discoveries in the yard, including some bones under a car, and they got to determine who those belong to. So that's where the whole whodunit part of this mystery comes in. So that's my first book. And again, everything I write, and I'm currently writing, I do try to base it in North Carolina. I try to base it, you know, with a narrator similar to my experience, but not completely, because I was always told, at least when you first start out, to write what you know and then kind of grow from there. And so I do try to write the things I know. So if anybody's got any questions about the process, the book itself, you know, anything you want to fire at me, I will gladly answer questions and hopefully make the, yeah, what's up?
How long did it take you to write?
So that book, before that book, I'd actually written another book that took me a couple years. The book helped me find an agent in New York. You know, that agent took it out to different publishers and it never sold. So I learned the hard way that not everything you write is going to end up on shelves. And so with the second book, I really took my time. I think I took over like 2 years to write that. And but I felt pretty good when it was done. And I felt like I learned a lot from the book I'd written before that didn't sell. And so when we went out with that book, I think about 4 or 5 months into that process, an editor in New York called my agent and said she wanted it. And so that was a good phone call to get after all that work. Yep. Because I know a lot of people would throw in the towel at that point, because I put a lot into, it actually started as my master's thesis, and I turned it into like a 300-page novel. So I put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears into that. So it was tough at first, but you know, the farther I've gotten away from that, I learned so much from that about, one, how to write a book and get one all the way to completion, and also one, quality enough to like get interest from agents and editors and things like that. So, you know, and it still happens, like even after you get published, you can write 2 or 3 books in a row that don't make it out to the market, which is, you know, it's a tough pill to swallow, but you just never know what an editor in New York or wherever, California, what they want. It's all subjective. So it's not, I think what I tell people is like to not take rejection personally, because they're looking for something they connect with, and they're getting, let's say they're getting dozens of, you know, novels sent to them by agents in a given week. So you have to be pretty lucky, and it's like you're rolling the dice every time. There are some people I know that could write about anything now. They're so successful that even if it's good or not, an editor might pick it up. But I think with mine, there was a little bit of luck involved because the editor who made an offer on that book, she grew up in Tennessee, like in a more rural area, and her uncle owned a salvage yard, and she lived next to it. So when she saw my book in the description that it was based mostly around this like junkyard, that initially got her interest, and luckily she liked the rest of it. But you just never know what someone's looking for, and there's an infinite amount of things you could write about, but sometimes you just got to get, I guess, a little bit lucky. When I was writing this book, I was working with like 4 or 5 different guys. We started like a writers group sort of near Chapel Hill. And so they had seen, it had eyes on it for a couple years before I, sent it to an agent. So I did feel like it was in a good place. Once she saw it and wanted it, I realized at that point I really had to put some hard work in because she was, very critical, like in a good way, like stuff I agreed with, and that's how I knew we were a good match. Like she was sending feedback and I was taking it all in. That's not to say like when you get feedback, even when you get feedback on a high school writing assignment, that's not always, every bit of it's probably not viable. Sometimes it's about, you still got to trust your own instincts in that. So I had to kind of figure out, luckily we were on the same page with most stuff, like where I was going to like make adjustments on where I was going to like try to hold my ground, like, this should stay in and this shouldn't. So it was different, but it was good because I felt like every time, she would have it for a few weeks and send it back, I felt like every time it got better and better. And then when she sold it to a publisher, that got even more intense because the editor that did buy that book, she was sending back just like pages of notes. And I'm like, man, I thought this was in a good place. And I guess it was overall, but there's so many little things you don't think about. And that's when you get those professional eyes on it, you realize like you're under some serious scrutiny. And so it's good to have, even if like you're just working with one person or if you're in a small writers group, it's good to have people, that'll be critical but also supportive. And then you also got to figure out how to weed through those voices. Now, like when I send my stuff to an agent, she's the only one that's read it. I don't let anybody read my stuff. My wife didn't read that book, which is dedicated to her, until after it was on shelves. I told her she couldn't like read a word of it. So it was weird. Like you start listening to too many voices, you don't know who to listen to. So I've kind of like dwindled down my people I send it to now. General idea. So when I teach high school and my students are writing like traditional research papers, like about a controversial issue, I make them outline, I make them take notes before, and then they start getting into the writing process because I think they have to have that foundation. With fiction writing, it's preference. So with me, I'm what they call a pantser. I write by the seat of my pants. I don't plan stuff out. I just make the characters and I have a general idea and I just let them tell the story for the most part. So I had maybe a general idea that something bad was going to happen, and I kind of let them figure out what it was as I went. So I don't think when I sat down to write that, the person who was responsible for the murders was even in my mind. And that happens sometimes. Sometimes you can plan something and it goes perfectly. I feel like I get too rigid and I try to fit what I originally outlined. And again, that's the same. Going back to teaching high school, when my students are writing a research paper, I'm like, sometimes when you get into writing the paper and it doesn't necessarily match your outline because the outline doesn't feel right when you put it down in paper form. That's how I feel about like fiction writing. Like it's a feel thing that I feel, I feel the things out as I go. And if I'm too rigid, I kind of lose my creativity, I feel like. I think everybody and everything I've ever written is like a combination of different people I know in real life, and that's what makes them real. I don't think I've ever fully based a character on somebody like down to a T, because they'd probably know. They'd probably call me and ask me why they're in my book with a different name. But I think like just hearing conversations, there used to be this gas station in my town where it was a full service station. They would come out like pump your gas for you. Like it was like old school. But like you would go in and sit there, and there would be guys that aren't even getting gas there, sitting around the counter talking, having conversations. And I would just listen to the stuff they talked about, and sometimes it was hilarious, and sometimes it was maybe a bit offensive, but I would just listen to it all, and I think over time, like hearing just random conversations, and then like thinking about the people I know in real life, that kind of like combines into a character eventually and makes them believable. I rarely make up someone out of the top of my head. Usually it's got some sort of basis on somebody I know. Yeah, I would say I only write in first person. Like I always have to write from the character. That's just how I write, and that's what I like. I like to read that stuff too. I would say every one of my main characters does have a little bit of my personality. They'll have a little bit of sense of humor. They'll also have like something from my like personal background mixed in, but not too much, because I don't want to be the main character of a book, but I do want them to be true. So I'm like, well, this stuff's true to me, so it should come out true on the page. And I also have to distance myself from that. Like, all right, this is a little too much about like something that happened to me. But I would never try to write personally, like at least if I'm writing first person, I would never try to write from a different race or a female perspective, because I don't feel like that's my place personally, and I don't feel like I could do it justice. Now, I use characters from all different backgrounds. Like I would say the sidekick in this book is a Mexican-American girl, sort of based on some students I taught that moved from Mexico, that had very specific personalities that I really liked, and like, kids I grew to love, over teaching them 2 or 3 years in high school. And she kind of like takes on some of their persona, but I would never like write from her perspective, because I don't think that's like right for me to do, like personally. Yep.
What do you do if you have like writer's block?
Well, see, I asked one of my professors that earlier when I was getting my creative writing degree, and he convinced me that writer's block didn't exist, and I tried to explain to him that it did. I was like, yeah, come on, it's a real thing. I would say that exists in an individual project. You might, I don't know where to go from here, but like in general, what he told me was that there is always something to write. He said, if you go sit down at that table and write about like somebody walking by or something that's going outside, you're writing. He said, you would be surprised how like just getting words on paper will like unravel your brain a little bit, and other stuff's going to start coming out. So I've always tried to keep that in mind. So, because if not, there are times when I've been writing a book and I'll get to a part like, what happens next? And I won't know what to do, so I'll just start writing something else. I also like to go back and rewrite as I'm going. If I do get stuck, I go back and try to like tune up the stuff I wrote earlier. And a lot of times when I'm doing that, that'll spur an idea. So, I guess writer's block is the thing, but there's always a way around it, for sure. Yep. I was told, like when I started writing, there was like less than a 1% chance that I would get a literary agent, and they were like, there's like less than like 0.5% chance you would ever see your book on a shelf, and that kind of ticked me off. I was like, I'm going to make this happen. Like, I'm not going to publish this myself. I was like, this is going, like, I'm going to see it on a bookshelf. Like, that was my determination from day one. So I had that, when I'm teaching Gatsby, I always tell my students, like, you have your green light. Like, what is that thing that like motivates you? That was my green light, is going into a bookstore and seeing shit like shelves full of like authors from North Carolina or Southern fiction authors. I'm like, well, they did it. Why can't I do it? And so I was very determined from like the time I started writing to make that happen. And if I didn't reach that goal, I wasn't going to do it anyway else. I was never going to publish it myself. I was like, I'm going to do this. Like, when I told my wife, I was like, I want you to walk into Barnes and Nobles and see my book on the shelf. I was like, and then I'll feel good about myself. I know that's kind of weird, but it happened. We made a video of it the first time I walked into Barnes and Nobles in Greensboro, and it was on the front shelf. And so that was probably one of the coolest experiences for me, but I always wanted that. And now I'm chasing that high again, I guess, with a second book, and I'm hoping that happens again. But it's not guaranteed, but that was the goal. So it feels pretty cool. Yep.
What tips would you have for new writers?
New writers? I would say the biggest thing I tell people is I mentioned this earlier, is to really kind of find one. I mean, you don't have to stick in one genre. Most people I know that write stick in like one or two. They don't write like in 5 different genres. But to find what makes you as a writer unique, like what experiences do you have that could come out on the page that nobody else in the world, because your exact experiences are unlike anybody else's in the world, like the way you've lived them, the way you see things. And if you can find that voice, whether it comes out in like, for me, crime fiction or in fantasy, there we go, horror, whatever it is, it should still, people, like if you had 5 books out, the name wasn't on the cover, they should be able to read it and know like, hey, this is a very unique voice. I could tell the same writer wrote this stuff. So finding your voice and what makes that different and your experience different is such a big thing. Because after that, all the technical stuff, you can learn that stuff, but but if you don't have that unique voice, you'll kind of get lost in the mix. Because I've had people, friends and colleagues that have tried to write, but I feel like they just try to mimic other writers they've seen, which is fine at first. But if you stick in that too long, like where you're just wanting to sound like Stephen King, which that's not your voice, so it's not coming out naturally. Like me trying to write a character in New York is not going to come out naturally, so I had to kind of find my niche and just stick with it. And eventually, I think that really paid off. Yeah, and so there have been times I just got notes back on a novel I'm working on from my agent just like 2 days ago. And she was talking about a character, and I realized she didn't know the guy was white. And I was like, he's a white character. She was just confused. She's like, because it was important to that part of the plot. And I realized I didn't do a full, thorough description. So usually I do try to have a description without sounding like I'm reading their like Facebook profile. So you kind of got to lace that stuff in and be clever about it instead of just describing them like it's like the tail of the tape for a boxing match, like they're 6'1", 190 pounds. So you got to lace that in without doing, I think, at least in my genre, without doing it too much, because at that point it feels like you're just reading some statistics off of a page instead of a story. So you have to be kind of clever with lacing that in. But you do want the reader to be able to picture these people and hear their voices and the nuances and how they say things and how they approach situations to make them unique to other characters in the book. So yeah, that's something I could do better a job of, at least on first drafts for sure. If you were to Google like how to get a literary agent, what it's going to tell you is like, write something good, edit it, make sure it's like the best it can possibly be. And so that's what I did. And I was lucky. I have friends that don't have agents after 3 or 4 years. The first agent I emailed offered me, and that doesn't happen. I got lucky. I don't know how, but I got really lucky because I've had stories and novels rejected 70, 80, 90 times. Like I'm used to rejection, so that was like a new experience for me. But what I did was I looked around at these different agents, and on their web pages they say what books they've published, what they're looking for. And so I was very, very targeted. There was a Southern fiction writer that I really liked, and he was around my age, and I felt like what we were working on was very similar. And so I targeted his agent, and I think I mentioned his name in the email about how my stuff was kind of in that same vein. And so I think that kind of narrowed it down. And then again, it was just sort of the luck of the draw. I was very fortunate. But for the most part, it takes a while. And again, it's the same as like an agent trying to sell it to a publishing house. It's all subjective. They might be looking for a very specific thing, and they could love yours, but it might not be something that like resonates with them, or they feel like they could put their passion into, which I get. It's like when my students submit work, there's some things I think, well, this is better written than that, but this one I connect with more. Not that that would change their grade, but that has taught me that being like subjective like that, I mean, that applies to everything, I guess. Yep. Yeah. I would like to teach writing full-time, creative writing specifically. I've taught research writing for years now, and I like it some days, and some days it's tough. I mean, it's a process teaching, because I think this semester I have 87 students on campus, and then I teach at a community college, so I think I have like 120 research papers to grade like in the next month. So it's a lot. I mean, but if it's creative writing, I don't know. There's a different feel for that, and they're much less likely to use AI when they do creative writing. So I would like to teach creative writing, but yeah, I would like to write full-time, which is pretty hard to do because writers generally don't make a lot of money. I would say out of the successful authors I know, not a lot of them can support themselves. I know one that's had 2 New York Times bestsellers. He can't support himself on just writing, which is mind-blowing to me. So if you hear about writers making money, 1, that's very rare. 2, it's because maybe their film or their writing was optioned as a film, or they got lucky and got on like Oprah's book club list. Now those people make some money because you're going to sell. If Oprah puts you in her book club or Reese Witherspoon puts you in her book club, that's an immediate 5,000 to 10,000 copies sold like immediately. Whether the book's good or not, it could be a terrible book, but if it makes Oprah's book club or Reese Witherspoon or another celebrity, that's where people start making money. So it's a roll of the dice. I would like to make enough money to do what I want, because I would just keep writing, but that is an end goal eventually. In my past, some of my best friends were musicians, like they were living in Nashville, and so I remember when they were like trying to make it big, they had no social media presence, so I was like, I kind of know my way around social media a bit, so I started helping them, and I learned like the more they put out there, you know, they didn't want to put too much out there, but enough out there where people know what they were doing, you know, exciting stuff, that it started to garner an audience. So when I got my first book deal, I kind of had that background. So I did Twitter/X. That is the biggest thing for writers currently, and it always has been. That's how I met a lot of who I consider famous authors and I've become friends with over the years. But Book Talk is interesting because I tried to do it for like a week, and not that I gave up, but someone in my genre is like it's not gonna fly here. If it's not romance or fantasy on Book Talk, it's probably not. That's why Colleen Hoover made it big, because she learned how to use Book Talk, and it's a very specific art. It's a very specific audience, because I would say the people that read what I write generally are not looking for books on Book Talk, but someone that's going to the beach and want a book to read over the weekend, they might go to Book Talk and see what. There are sections in Barnes and Nobles now dedicated to Book Talk, which is mind blowing to me. So good for those people. I wish what I wrote was bigger on Book Talk, but it's just not. So that's one part. But Instagram, Twitter, things like that have always been at least helpful in networking, but also, you know, making yourself visible and accessible to like readers and things like that. So, yep. Any other? Yeah. No, I'm not. I can convince a couple of my students I am sometimes, but I'm really not. I don't know many authors that could walk through the door that y'all, who would you recognize? Like if you saw their face, you would recognize them. I mean, Stephen King, I know a bunch now, but before I was a writer, there was people that would walk in the room and they could be sitting right next to me, and I had no idea. That's what I consider, I guess, famous. Like if you go out to eat and people are asking about your book, that has not happened.
Have you gotten recognized in public?
Yes, but not in like a cool way. I mean, I was actually in a bookstore one time when someone was picking up my book to buy it, which was weird. Like what were the chances? I started laughing. Not like they didn't hear me laughing, but I was like, what in the world? Like they just picked it up. It was new then, so it was kind of near the front, but it was still that was cool, because when they turned around, I was like, I can sign that if you want me to. And I think they said no and kept walking. No, I'm just kidding. No, they didn't. They let me. They didn't. They let me. But that was, other than that, yeah, that's it. I would say I was in a bookstore one day, and again, I was just floating the idea in my mind at that time to write, and I saw a book on the front shelf that had a cool cover The author's name is Wiley Cash. He's from North Carolina. He's a professor. And I read on the back, and I was like, oh, he's a little older than me. He's got a couple kids. Well, actually, at the time, I don't think he had a couple kids, but he's had a similar background than I did. And that was his debut novel. And something about that struck a chord with me because I took it home and read it. And I'm not a fast reader as far as like, I take my time with the books, but I remember reading that over the weekend. And that next week I started writing. And then 2 years later, Wiley Cash was my professor in college, and he was like my personal mentor, which was wild to me. But I made that my goal. I wouldn't call it stalking, but I found where he was working, and I applied, and I got in. And when I showed up, they said, do you mind if Wiley is your mentor for 2 years? I said, that's exactly what I wanted. So, and his name is, if you look on the front cover of my book, his name's on the front. He endorsed the book. So that was really cool. And he's probably the best teacher I've ever had. And I knew that about him. So I think seeing a North Carolina author in his 30s do it pushed me like, hey, I can do this. And so that was probably my moment. He was very, like, where I went to school, people were afraid of him. Not as a person, he's a great person, but as a mentor, they were terrified because he would not only mark up your document, he would send you an audio file. So like the first one he sent me, it was at 18 minutes. And I would see the first 45 seconds and that was great. And I was like, oh, I'm going to make it. Like, I'm so good. Like, oh my God. The next 19 minutes weren't that. And that's what I needed. I needed someone to kick me in the butt. Like, he was brutal. Like, but everything he said was fair. I didn't need him to like pat me on the back and be like, hey, Scott, this is good. Like, you're going to make it, buddy. He was encouraging, but he was very critical. Like, everything. He didn't let anything pass. He'd like, readers aren't going to believe this, and like, or this character is flat and they don't make any sense. And, you know, he was much more articulate than that. But that's the kind of thing. And at first, I remember I sat down and I was like, man, this is what I wanted. And I got it. And the first 10 or 20 minutes, I remember like, maybe I'm not cut out for this. And then, I don't know, maybe after I ate dinner that night, I was like, man, this is exactly what I wanted. If I'm going to get better, like somebody's going to have to push me. And he did. He absolutely did. Both years I was in college. And a lot of what I learned was from him. So that was a really cool experience. And it wasn't an easy one. I think that's why I enjoyed it. Because I've had teachers and even I had a professor that was, I think she was, so the National Book Award usually gets 5 finalists. It's like a 1 in a million shot you get it. She was one of them, and I was like, oh man, I'm about to get like Wiley Cash Part 2. And she was not a good teacher, and she did not have a personality. So we didn't really vibe well. She gave me some good feedback, and it wasn't a waste, but I was like, I think that's what set them apart. She might have been afraid to offend me or hurt my feelings. He wasn't, and he still isn't. If I sent him something now, he would chop it up. Probably not as bad as he used to, because I've learned a little bit over the years, but that's why. So when you get feedback from teachers, listen, only sometimes are they being mean. Most of the time they're trying to help, especially if they like actually believe in you, like whether it's an art teacher, science, English. I mean, they're trying to push you. I do. It's a secret. I did. Now, I will say this. They print a certain amount. It's on a second printing, so it did earn out of the contract, meaning like, so if you earn out on your contract, that means the rest of your life, every book sold, you get royalties for. If you don't, it's almost like, it's the same with a record deal. If you hear someone getting like $1 million record deal, they don't see most of that money until they sell enough records to get that million back to their publisher. Then they start making money. So I didn't sell 1 million. Nobody sells 1 million copies except for like Stephen King. But it did earn out, so I was proud of that. I was very proud when they said, all right, you're going to finally start getting royalties. And by the way, authors they make less than like $3 for a book. If the book is sold for $30, they make about $3 on that book. It's nothing. Like, unless you're hand selling it to people. But if someone who goes to Barnes & Noble and buys mine, you know, that's awesome. But it's not like I get $30 every time. I wish I did. That'd be awesome. Maybe we could talk about like working part-time if that was the case. But that's the reality of it. And same with someone selling like a record in a record store or a CD. It's not a lot. No, I mean, it's going to have something bad happen in it. that's just kind of like what I do. And so most of the conferences I go to are crime writer conferences. So, which are cool because a lot of the like successful crime writers have like Netflix and Hulu shows, so I know a lot of those guys. Like, but again, I wouldn't recognize them if I saw them out in public. But you know, it's funny to see. I saw, I think at the last one of the ladies who wrote, what was it? Because my wife was with me. I said, "Come over here," because she wrote this. I think she wrote like the treatments for Stranger Things, like the first season, some of that stuff. And some of the people, like, you know, again, you would just never know. So it is cool to be in that genre because a lot of stuff I do watch, some of the people I run into or I've been on panels with wrote it. So I can like ask them questions and fanboy out a little bit, I guess. I'm a father of a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old, and I work 2 jobs. So it's like whenever I can find time, I will say this. I write best early in the morning, like at like 7 in the morning, with my kids eating breakfast and throwing stuff at each other. Because when you wake up, you're still half in a dream state, so you're pulling from your subconscious a little bit, and it's not, you don't have all the muck of the day messing with your mind. And so a lot of good stuff actually comes out, even if you're tired, because you're still in that dream state a little bit. So I would say over time, it became morning. I used to kind of lock myself away, but sometimes you just got to think, you know, a lot of people like romanticize like the writing process, but sometimes it's like a job. You just got to do it. Like, especially if I have a deadline, you just sit down and do it. I'm not saying it's good every time it comes out, but like now it's kind of a morning. I got up this morning and was writing like before 7 o'clock for about an hour. So that's kind of become my time. Or sometimes I'll get an idea and I'll get my notepad on my phone and I'll write. I wrote part of this novel on like docs on my phone because I was like on an airplane and I had an idea and I had to get it down. So wherever, I guess, works. I have a couple students, and it's rare to find a student who writes, like, well, not necessarily writes, but wants to write for a living, like, or eventually, you know, have like a book. What I usually tell them is to not be in a rush. I was like, it's going to take a while till you get to the point where you know, you could start sending that stuff out. I was like, and don't be afraid of feedback. And also I would find a group of people, even if it's one person, you know, to bounce ideas off of, back and forth, or someone to read your stuff. It's invaluable. It's good to have fresh eyes on a book. I've spent so much time on certain like passages that there were things that I wasn't seeing because my eyes were almost blurry from looking at it. So if I don't step away for 3 or 4 weeks and then come back and look at that, I can hand it to someone else and be like, what am I missing here? And so having somebody, and I did have that with this book, and you know, a couple of those guys were pretty successful authors already, so I knew I was getting good advice. And even then, you still got to trust your instincts about what you are writing, and if you're passionate about it, to stick with it, because it takes a while. There's no timeline. The lady that published my book, she was also an author, which a lot of like book publishers aren't former authors. She didn't publish her first book till she was 57, and she won 3 major awards with it. And I think she sold movie rights to it. And so don't be in a rush. You just never know. And if it's something you like, just keep doing it. And don't think about publishing as a business, writing is an art. And that's what I try to tell people. Like, you know, sometimes I'm thinking, well, I got to get this next book on shelves. But that, you know, at that point, I'm relying on other people and publishing. But if I can concentrate on what I do, the rest of it eventually is going to work itself out if you just stick with it. There's an author I'm friends with that 3 or 4 years ago, his name's S.A. Cosby. He has 2 or 3 big movies coming out. One of them's got Leonardo DiCaprio in it. I think John Legend just bought one of his movies and adapted it. I think he's the biggest crime writer in America right now. But he's from like an hour from here. He's from Virginia, and I was doing a reading at a bar of all places one night. And a guy came up to me after, and it was him, and he had some advice about something I read in this book. Before this book was published, there was a chapter I was working on about a funeral, and this guy comes up after, and he says, you know, he said, that was awesome. He said, one of these details about the funeral you might want to tweak. He said, because I work at a funeral home right now, And then 3 months later, he signs his first book deal, and then he was on Jimmy Fallon a few months ago. So it's bizarre because he grew up poor. He didn't have anything. He still posts pictures of the little house he grew up in online because he is not poor now. He actually is making money. There was a guy named Harlan Coben. He's got some shows on Netflix right now. Like, I can't remember the names of them because I haven't watched any, but I met him this year. And I haven't seen Stephen King anywhere. I mean, I know everybody like recognizes him. But I've met quite a few. But after you meet them, they kind of lose. I always thought they'd be like celebrities, but they're just people trying to write. And they're people that get frustrated. They're people that write books that don't get sold still, which is surprising after you meet somebody that you consider like famous or a great writer, but they're just people. So it's pretty cool though. Yeah, so the way that works is a filmmaker or a director would buy the rights to that movie or that book. They would pay you a fee. And if it ever gets produced, it's very hard to get something produced into a movie. Like a lot of stuff is optioned for movie and it never even gets, the first scene filmed because so much stuff can happen. There's been 2 film groups interested in this book. It hasn't happened, and it could happen tomorrow. It could never happen. But, if that book does end up getting optioned, a lot of times you lose complete creative control. It's like you do whatever, because a film version of it is not a novel version of it. It's going to come out differently. That's why a lot of times in movies you watch, you're like, this isn't as good as the book. And occasionally you'd be like, all right, I actually like this movie better because it's an entirely different thing. Visual and like writing are totally different things. There are books that I love and I cannot watch the movie because it's so far from like, the original. But I think I know that going in. So I would gladly have someone cut me a check and do whatever they wanted with my book. They could change the name, whatever at that point. But it's almost happened, and I hope that's always been a goal of mine because I think cinematically when I write. I think about how things would play out. I fully casted like actors and actresses in my mind of who would play. And I can't even name them all right now because some of them are kind of obscure, but like, oh, this guy looks and sounds like what I want. But yeah, I mean, it's interesting to think about. I know one guy who has sold the rights, but also kept writing, like, he signed the rights over, but the film group allowed him to consult on the film and write on the film. So he actually got to adapt his own with the help of which is very rare, but it's pretty cool because it's like true to the novel itself. Have some.
Does your students read your books?
Some of them do, and I told them like we can't read this in school because of just some of the language and stuff that happens, and plus is like there's stuff we're tied to. But sometimes, yeah, or a student I don't teach will pass me in the hall and tell me like they read it or their parent read it. So that's and sometimes they bring them for me to like sign, which is weird being at school, but it's also kind of cool. But there are some. I wish they were required to read it because that would be like 85 sales per semester at least, Like reading it out loud. Well, this is the first time I've read that passage in over a year. So at first it was a little clunky. I could feel it, but I'm used to it. I think what got me used to that is teaching high school because when I first started teaching, I was terrified in front of people in general. But I think you just keep. It's like with anything, repetition over time. I enjoy doing it, and I enjoy reading stuff I write for specific events and stuff like that. So I think it's normal now. At first, I think it was a little weird, probably. I was like, all right, how's this going to sound out loud? So now when I write, and this is some advice for young writers, even if you're writing a research paper, read it out loud. You don't have to do it around people. Like, go somewhere else because that's awkward and people get mad. But your ear is going to catch things that your eye didn't catch. You're like, why does that sentence sound horrible? And then you read it out loud again. So that applies to, I make my students do it, especially if they're about to do a presentation. I'm like, go practice this. I was like, because I promise you some things are going to surprise you if you get up there and don't practice this. So I think that has helped me now. Like, I read all the stuff I write out loud. I have a buddy who calls his mother every night, and he's a pretty big writer. He just won an Edgar Award for like best first novel. But he calls his mom every night and reads, and she's probably in her 60s or 70s, and he reads what he wrote that day. And she tells him every time, that's the best thing you've ever written, and they hang up. It happens every day. So that's kind of a weird thing, but like it's good to read your stuff out loud. So he's heard all this stuff before it hits the page, which is really helpful. Yeah, I do, because I enjoy the process itself. It's frustrating sometimes, and I get stressed out, and I get short with my kids or my wife, and they're like, and my wife knows when I'm working on something because my head is somewhere else sometimes. She'll be talking, and she'll be like, "You're writing in your head, aren't you?" I'm like, "I'm sorry, like, my bad." So that kind of stuff is frustrating, but she knows why I do it, and I try to be better about that thing. But yeah, it's definitely worth it because it's almost like teaching. I would like to make money doing it. I'm definitely not doing it for the money. So it is something I do enjoy, but it's cool to see something come out. Even if I've had poetry like published in magazines and short stories published in magazines. Even seeing those is like super rewarding because you knew how much, especially if it's something you've almost given up on. You're like, wow, like I can't believe this is actually out here. So that part is pretty interesting. That's tough because I just told y'all I hated reading in high school, and I'm not lying. Like I did not want to read All Quiet on the Western Front. Like I didn't want to read that. We didn't read Gatsby in high school. I wish we had. I might have liked reading, even though that book, not everybody. It's not for everybody. I think just finding like a genre you like, even if it, nonfiction, fiction. I started really again in nonfiction in my 20s. I wanted to know about the Zodiac Killer, so I read about him, like stuff like that. I don't know why I was interested in it. I think I had a cousin that used to have all those books on her shelves, and I thought they were like forbidden, but I started reading them. And I think just finding something you like, and don't think you have to like everything you read, and don't let a teacher get up there and fake it like they really like something. You can tell if a teacher really likes something they're reading, or if they're trying to convince you that it's good. I just did it with Gatsby. I'm sorry. Because that's nothing like what I read or generally write. But I think just finding something that's different, even if it has to do with like a hobby or just stuff you watch on TV, that's kind of how I got into it. Because if you just think I have to read this because it's popular or other people are reading it, that'll kill your interest in it quick. But the more you do it and you kind of find what you like, because there's a lot of stuff I will not read, but I know other people do. I think just finding what you like it's a big thing. And so it's good you give them choice, because I do like 2 outside readings with my honors group. One, I make them like read like a classic. And then for the second one, which they like a lot better, I'm like, all right, since this is American Lit class, pick an American author. And it's good to have them read from authors of a different race or a different gender or just something different to open up their eyes a little bit. And you never know what that might spark as far as their interests go. But hey, it's a struggle every day, for sure. My favorite one to teach is either Gatsby or Mice and Men, but those aren't like my favorite books. Wiley Cash, I do like his books because he writes about North Carolina. I don't think there's one. There's a book called She Rides Shotgun that's about to be a movie about a girl whose dad gets out of prison, and he teaches basically her how to like snap people's arms and like choke them out because he's a jiu-jitsu expert, and they have to take down a biker gang. So I gave you the full synopsis there, but I think he's like the best crime writer in America. So like that's like a good book to me. And he also, the same author also wrote the most of the show Gotham about Batman that came out a few years ago. So he's pretty good at what he does. So, but it switches. There's so much. It's the same with like movies. I can't name one because I like so many. But that's a good problem to have, I guess. Yeah, I do watch, Discovery ID channel. Me and my wife used to watch it all the time before we had kids. Now we don't get to watch it as much because it's like Paw Patrol, daily Paw Patrol, Rubble and Crew. That's every day now. But I do. And I don't usually take ideas, but sometimes you'll, like, truth, like they say, is truth is stranger than fiction. There's some stuff on those shows. I'm like, there is no way that's true or that happened, which is good to know as a writer because sometimes you're writing like, is this believable? So if I watch enough of those shows, it makes me confident. Like if I do some weird twist in the book, I'm like, oh, that could actually happen in real life. So I would say it definitely helps my writing, to watch that kind of stuff. what shows to watch. I'm watching Black Mirror right now. I just like devoured last night. I went through that. I do like Stranger Things. Most crime shows I like. I'm trying to think of the ones I've watched this year that are really good. I'm watching one called Mobland right now about mafia life in London with Tom Hardy. That's pretty wild. But it's not. Sometimes I used to watch and rewatch The Office like nonstop. So I do like comedy. So it's like crime and comedy, horror. I like horror. Occasionally sci-fi. I just watch Silo. That's pretty cool. But now it's just finding time to watch stuff. Or if I'm not too tired at night after writing, teaching kids all day, and I actually have the brain space. So, yep. Well, I appreciate those questions, y'all. Y'all actually asked some really good ones. Y'all need to travel with me and ask these questions at bigger conferences, because sometimes people are like, just ask about my process 1,000 times. I'm like, which I'll talk about, but thank y'all for asking good questions, and everybody. We good? Yeah.